It's Friday, but Sunday's coming. That's the title of a poem written a number of years ago now by an American pastor. It's about the apparent defeat of Jesus on Good Friday, and the final lines of the poem are these. It's Friday, hope is lost, death has won, sin has conquered, and Satan's just a laughing. It's Friday, Jesus is buried, a soldier stands guard, and a rock is rolled into place. But it's Friday. It is only Friday. Sunday is a-coming. Every year we remember, particularly in our Maundy Thursday evening service and our Good Friday morning service, we remember how Jesus was arrested on Thursday after the Last Supper and then executed on Friday. And this is the most evil thing that has ever happened in all of history. And so it's appropriate that there would be solemnity in those services and a sadness hanging over those days. But of course, we know that Easter Day is coming and that we will soon be singing, "Thine be the glory, risen, conquering Son." When does that triumph of Jesus, when does it first appear in the Gospels? What are the first signs of Jesus' Easter triumph? Is it the moment when Jesus appears, the risen Jesus appears to people? Is it the moment when the stone is rolled away? Is it the moment of the violent earthquake at dawn on the Sunday? Or is it earlier than that we actually see the first signs of Jesus' Easter triumph? Actually, we've seen some signs of Jesus' triumph already as we've been reading through Matthew's Gospel. For example, the way that he still has complete authority when he's arrested, or the tearing of the curtain in the temple at the moment of his death as the way to God is now open. Or the words of the centurion as Jesus dies, "Surely this was the Son of God." We've seen those signs, and what I'm going to say to you today is that I think the signs continue long before the Sunday. Signs, if you've got eyes to see them, even while Jesus dies and is buried. We sometimes use the phrase dead and buried to mean that something is finally gone, conclusively finished. Like when we say that business is dead and buried, it's not coming back, or the argument is over. Well, when his enemies think that Jesus is finally dead and buried, the truth is that he's anything but dead and buried. And we're going to see some of those signs of Jesus' triumph. What signs? Well, first of all, unsung disciples remaining faithful to Jesus, even while all this is going on. Verse 55, have a look at verse 55, describing the scene at the cross. Many women were there, watching from a distance. They'd followed Jesus from Galilee to care for his needs. If we ask how many disciples did Jesus have, of course the correct Sunday school answer is 12. And the 12 men are certainly central to the Gospels. They're all named. We have a record of them being called by Jesus. Jesus focuses on them. And actually, they're not just disciples, which means followers. They're also apostles, which means those sent out. But the 12 are not the only disciples of Jesus. And among the many other disciples are a group of women who are only mentioned occasionally. They're often in the background, but they're important. And when Jesus is arrested, the 12 flee. They kind of disappear from the narrative altogether. The 12 will later be restored, or 11 of them, and sent out into the world by Jesus. But the women take center stage from Thursday through till Sunday. And 3 are mentioned here, but there were more than that. Mary Magdalene, and then Mary, the mother of James and Joses, and another woman who, looking at the other Gospels, may be Salome. But she's the mother of James and John, that is Zebedee's sons. And these women, we're told in verse 55, have followed Jesus, at least for the last journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, maybe for much longer than that, perhaps for most, if not all, of the 3 years of Jesus' public ministry. It says there that they've taken care of Jesus' needs. They've ministered to him. The word is the word diakoneo. It's the word that means to serve or to minister or to wait on. It's the word, the related word is the word for deacon or servant. And we're told that they are faithfully remaining at the cross despite the awfulness of what is happening and the threat to themselves. They're there, watching from a distance. They presumably hear Jesus cry out in the words of Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" They watch him die. They hear his final cry, and they see the Father's response, the earthquake that shook the earth and split the rocks. And then if you look down to verse 59 and 60, you'll see they're still there, faithfully remaining while Jesus' body is taken down from the cross and carried to the tomb, where, verse 61, they remain opposite the tomb as Jesus, wrapped in a cloth, is laid in the tomb and the stone is rolled over the entrance. What do we know about these women? From other Gospels, we know that Mary Magdalene had been possessed, demon-possessed, until Jesus sorted her out. She's a different woman now. The mother of Zebedee's sons, of course, came up earlier in Matthew's Gospel. She's the one who came to Jesus asking for her 2 sons to have the best seats in Jesus' kingdom. And she's rebuked. They're rebuked by Jesus. But despite that rebuke, she has stayed with Jesus and the other disciples. So, although we know that the Holy Spirit is poured out in a fresh way at Pentecost, and that comes later, but he's been at work before then. These women, along with the other disciples, have been changed by Jesus. No one can put their faith in Jesus without the work of the Holy Spirit. And these women continue to act out of love for Christ. They are still devoted to him. They still, if you like, believe in him, despite others considering him a fraud or a blasphemer. And their actions are going to be important in convincing other people later on that Jesus has risen, because they are the ones who saw him die. They saw others take him down from the cross. They saw where his body was laid. They will testify that the same man who was buried is the man who was raised. So although this day looks like a day of complete defeat for Jesus, here's a glimpse of Jesus still at work by his Spirit in the lives of these women. God changes the world through people like this. He doesn't seem to need his disciples to be rich or well-known or significant in the world's eyes. I think the opposite is true, that he usually works quietly and almost unnoticed, one person at a time, one family at a time, working through the words and the works of his followers. And so there's a challenge for you and me, isn't there? That we should ask the Lord to work in us that we would be faithful disciples like these women. Most of us are not going to be known for very long. We're not going to be remembered by the world in generations to come, but the Lord knows. He knows who are his, and he remembers. When we see him face to face, he's not going to struggle to remember your name, or where you lived, or how you served him and his gospel and his kingdom in his power. And so we need to ask Jesus, don't we, to help us to go on serving him faithfully, so that when we meet him, he will be able to say, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Jesus then, signs of his victory in these unsung disciples who remain faithful right through to the end. What other sign? The secret disciple who boldly steps forward for Jesus. Verse 57. As evening approached, there came a rich man from Arimathea named Joseph, who had himself become a disciple of Jesus. Again, if you look at the other Gospels, we find out, so Mark tells us that Joseph is a member of the Sanhedrin, that is the Jewish council, the very council that has condemned Jesus to death. And John, in his Gospel, tells us that Joseph of Arimathea has been a secret disciple because he was so afraid of his fellow Jews. John also tells us that he didn't come alone, but he was accompanied by another secret disciple, that is Nicodemus, the man who came to Jesus at night, presumably because he didn't want to be seen to have an interest in Jesus. So I'm guessing that Joseph is not necessarily known to the 12 or to the women. His faith in Jesus has been entirely hidden. But now he steps forward. He comes to Pilate, no less, to ask for Jesus' body. This is his cover is blown, isn't it? I mean, everyone can see now that he must be a disciple of Jesus, or at least an admirer of Jesus. It's a brave thing to do. The danger has certainly not passed. The council has just condemned Jesus to death. Presumably anyone who shows sympathy for Jesus risks being condemned by them as well. Maybe it just sunk in as he saw the awful results of the Sanhedrin's decision, the execution of Jesus. Is that what has finally spurred him to come out into the open and take action? It's too late for him to be a disciple of Jesus while Jesus lived. It's too late for him to protest against Jesus' condemnation. But now he's decided that at least he will not be ashamed of Jesus in his death. And so he takes the lifeless body of Jesus down from the cross, wraps him in a clean linen cloth, and places Jesus in his own new tomb. We know from tombs that have been excavated that this probably would have been a small chamber cut into the rock with a very low entrance. And eventually those chambers would be extended as dug further into the rock until they became places that could accommodate many bodies. But this is a new tomb. No one's been buried here yet, and it's probably very small with just a single stone ledge opposite the entrance for a wrapped body to be laid on. So do you see how Joseph's actions also, just like the actions of the women, are going to be really important later on in convincing other people that Jesus has risen from the dead? Because the victims of crucifixion would generally be placed or thrown into a communal grave. But you see, Joseph, his actions mean that Jesus was buried alone in a new, identifiable tomb. When that tomb was found open and empty on the third day, there was no doubt about whose body had gone. So here's a challenge for you, to be a faithful disciple like Joseph. Now, I doubt that you're a secret believer in Jesus because you're here in church. That is, unless you crept out of your house and came here in disguise. But you may be a secret believer in some of your relationships, maybe at work or with particular friends, where you just don't really want to be known as a disciple of Jesus. I doubt that being known as a Christian is going to put your life at risk, but it might put your popularity at risk or your reputation for being, an easygoing, fun person or a reliable employee. It might make people suspicious of how you're going to act or what you'll say or what you think about them if they know that you are a follower of Jesus. Well, Joseph challenges me to give up any secrecy that we have, to give up our fear and throw our lot in fully with Jesus. What have we got to lose? And then the third thing, as well as the women and Joseph, we have the authorities. And we just see how impotent they are as they try to keep Jesus in the tomb. Have a look at verse 62. The next day, the one after preparation day, the chief priests and the Pharisees went to Pilate. Sir, they said, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, after 3 days, I will rise again. So the Jewish authorities, they go to Pilate. Preparation day is the preparation day for the Sabbath. So they're going to Pilate. They're breaking all their rules because they're going to Pilate on the Sabbath to deal with this. That's a mark of how worried they are that Jesus' disciples are going to steal his body from the tomb and claim that he has been raised from the dead as he said he was going to be. That's what this deceiver had said would happen. And of course, they don't want people to be deceived. Although, really, that's just hypocrisy, isn't it? Because they're the ones who used the false witnesses to try and convict Jesus. And actually, if you look into the next chapter, very soon they're going to be paying the soldiers a large sum of money to get them to lie about what happened to Jesus' body. But they want Pilate to make the tomb secure until the third day. There's two ways of translating what Pilate says in verse 65, his response. The NIV that you've got in front of you says, Pilate says, take a guard, go make the tomb as secure as you know how. In other words, Pilate is agreeing to their request, providing a guard to seal the tomb and to watch over it. In other words, Pilate also doesn't want any resurrection claims. But other translations translate those words differently. The English Standard Version, instead of take a guard, has you have a guard. And that is possibly what the words mean. In other words, Pilate is saying, you've got your own temple guards. He's dismissing their request. He's saying, look, it's your problem. You wanted him crucified. Now you're worried about his body being stolen. Why have you come to me? You sort it out. Use your own guards. You seal the tomb, if you can. And if that's the way we should read it, then it's the Jewish authorities who seal the tomb with the temple guards. Well, whether it was Pilate doing this or whether it's the Jews, their efforts are in vain. They want to keep Jesus in the tomb, but at his death, the rocks were split and the tombs of believers were broken open. There is no chance that a stone door or a seal or a company of guards is going to keep Jesus in that tomb. Those men keeping watch by torchlight in front of the tomb have no idea of the power that is about to be unleashed that night. So if we say, what are the first signs of Jesus' triumph? Well, even as Jesus is buried, victory is emerging. And the encouragement to us then is to be a faithful disciple, to be on the winning side. At the time, the winning side looked like either the might of the Roman Empire or the fierce determination of the Jews in their battle for liberation as a nation. But neither of those powerful authorities was a match for Jesus. The only true, eternally safe place to be was as a disciple of Jesus, as his faithful disciple, trusting that whatever suffering might come your way for being his disciple, whatever loss, even the loss of your own life, that would be worth it. Because death couldn't hold him, and guards couldn't keep his body in the tomb. He said that he would be killed, but he would rise again on the third day. And Jesus had promised that those who lost their lives for him would find it. And that's what all these faithful disciples would discover. The women who faithfully stood with Jesus in his suffering and followed him and his body all the way to the tomb. Joseph, who stepped forward to go and see Pilate to ask for the body. They all found in the end that the Lord's power was at work, that this would prove to be triumph for Jesus. And they experienced the Lord's power keeping them faithful, enabling them to be bold. And then going on doing that until they would see the Lord face to face. So are you trusting Jesus like they did? He invites you to follow him. He commands you to lay down your life for him. He offers you all that you need to be his faithful disciple. A faithful disciple of the victorious Son of God. Let's pray together.